Lorenzo Santoro, the ghost of Chicago, could burn a city without checking his pulse. He believed he buried his only weakness 6 years ago in a grave marked Jane Doe. He was wrong. It started in a cafe when young Mia looked at the city's most dangerous man. Pointing to the jagged ink-black tattoo on his wrist, she whispered words that would bring a criminal empire crashing down. "My mummy has that picture too." In that second, the ghost realized he wasn't being haunted. He was being hunted. This is the story of a lost love that refused to die. The mid-November wind in Chicago didn't just blow, it bit. It chewed through wool coats and rattled the bones of the skyscrapers lining Michigan Avenue. Lorenzo Santoro sat in the back corner of the Roasted Bean, a generic high-traffic coffee shop that served as the perfect camouflage for a man worth $300 million in illegal assets. He hated it. He hated the smell of burnt milk. He hated the indie folk music. And he hated that he had to be here personally to receive the encryption key from the Serbian syndicate. At 34, Lorenzo was the capo bastone of the Santoro crime family. The press called him the architect. The streets called him the ghost. He was 6'3" of tailored Italian wool and suppressed violence. His eyes, the color of oxidized steel, scanned the room. 5 minutes, his bodyguard. A mountain of a man named Rocco grunted into his earpiece from the counter. Lorenzo adjusted the cuff of his dress shirt. As he did, the sleeve rode up slightly, revealing the edge of a tattoo on the inside of his left wrist. It wasn't the usual Mafia iconography, no praying hands, no crosses. It was stark black and unsettling. A skeletal bird carrying a single bleeding rose. It was a mark of shame, a reminder of the night she died. "Excuse me, mister." The voice was small, tiny. Lorenzo didn't flinch, but his eyes snapped down. Standing by his table was a child, a girl no older than 6, clutching a dirty stuffed rabbit by the ear. She had wild curls the color of roasted chestnuts and eyes that were startlingly familiar, a piercing, intelligent hazel. Rocco was moving from the counter, hand reaching inside his jacket. Lorenzo held up a single finger to stop him. He didn't kill children. He wasn't a monster, despite what the FBI files said. "You're blocking my view, kid." Lorenzo said, his voice a low rumble. He didn't smile. The girl didn't back down. She tilted her head, staring at his hand resting on the table. "You have a boo-boo picture." Lorenzo frowned, glancing at his wrist. He pulled his sleeve down sharply. "Go find your parents." "My mummy has that tattoo too," the girl said matter-of-factly. The world stopped. The noise of the espresso machine, the chatter of the hipsters, the wind outside it all vanished into a vacuum of sudden, violent silence. Lorenzo felt the blood drain from his face, leaving him cold. He leaned forward, the predator replacing the businessman. "What did you say?" The girl blinked, seemingly unaware she was speaking to a man who had dissolved bodies in lye for less than an insult. "The birdie." She pointed a chubby finger at his covered wrist. "Mommy has the birdie, on her shoulder. She says it's from before she was sad." Lorenzo's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. It was impossible. That design wasn't flash art you picked off a wall. It was a custom sketch he had drawn himself on a napkin in a safe house in 2018. He had inked it onto her skin himself, and she had inked it onto his. Isabella. But Isabella was dead. He had seen the car go into the river. He had stood on the bridge while the police dredged the wreckage. They never found the body, But nobody survived that drop. "Where is your mother?" Lorenzo demanded, his voice cracking. "Mia. Oh my God. Mia." A woman's voice cut through the cafe, frantic, terrified. Lorenzo looked up. Near the entrance, a woman in a beige trench coat was pushing through the line. She was disheveled, her hair wet from the rain, holding 2 takeout cups. But Lorenzo knew the way she moved. He knew the arch of her neck. She turned her eyes, scanning the room for the child, and then they locked onto him. Time didn't just stop, it shattered. It was Sarah Jenkins, or at least that's what her name tag probably said now. But to Lorenzo it was Isabella, the woman who had betrayed his family, the woman he was supposed to kill, the woman he had loved enough to let go only for her to die anyway. Her face went pale, as white as the foam in the cups she dropped. Coffee splattered across the floor. "Isabella," Lorenzo breathed. She didn't hesitate. She didn't scream. She did exactly what a trained operative would do. She bolted. "Mia, run!" she screamed, lunging forward, scooping the child up with a strength that belied her slender frame and sprinting out the side door into the alleyway. "Rocco!" Lorenzo roared, overturning the table as he stood up. "Get the car! Now!" The rain in Chicago was heavy now, turning the alleyways into slick, oil-stained rivers. Lorenzo didn't care about the rain, ruining his $3,000 suit. He ran with the predatory speed of a wolf. He burst out of the coffee shop's rear exit, his gun already in his hand, a reflex he couldn't control. He saw the taillights of a beat-up Honda Civic peeling out of the lot tires, screeching. "Block the exit!" Lorenzo shouted into his comms, but the Honda hopped the curb, scraping its undercarriage with a sickening crunch, and merged recklessly into the heavy traffic of Wacker Drive. Rocco pulled up in the black armored SUV seconds later. Lorenzo didn't wait for the car to stop completely before he jumped into the passenger seat. "Get her. Do not run her off the road. Just keep her in sight." "Boss, who is that?" Rocco asked, swerving through traffic, ignoring the horns. "A ghost," Lorenzo muttered, wiping the rain from his face. His hand was shaking. He clenched it into a fist. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number that only 3 people in the world possessed. "Speak," a digitized voice answered. It was the Eye, his private intelligence broker. "I need a trace on a license plate. Illinois plates. Honda Civic rusted gray. Heading north on Wacker," Lorenzo barked. "And I need you to find everything on a woman living in Chicago under an alias. Look for single mothers. Age 28. Child named Mia, age 6. "Lorenzo," the voice warned. "You sound unstable." "She's alive, Blake. Isabella is alive." There was a long pause on the line. "That's impossible. The Bratva confirmed the hit 6 years ago. We paid for the funeral." "I'm looking at her," Lorenzo snapped. "And she has a kid that looks like—" He trailed off, the realization hitting him with the force of a freight train. "My mummy has that tattoo. The timeline. 6 years ago. Isabella had disappeared in October. If she was pregnant, then—" "Blake," Lorenzo's voice dropped to a whisper. "The girl. She has my eyes. I'll find them." Blake said, the line going dead. The chase ended, not in a high-speed crash, but in a desperate abandonment. 20 minutes later, they found the Honda abandoned under the L-train tracks in a sketchy neighborhood on the south side. The driver's door was open. The engine was still ticking. Lorenzo got out, gun drawn, sweeping the area. The rain washed over the graffiti-covered brick walls. "She switched vehicles," Rocco noted, checking the mud. "Or she went on foot into the subway." Lorenzo approached the car. In the back seat, the stuffed rabbit the girl had been holding was lying on the floorboard. He picked it up. It smelled like strawberries and cheap laundry detergent. He looked at the dashboard. There was an ID badge hanging from the rearview mirror. St. Mary's Hospital, nursing assistant, Sarah Miller. Sarah Miller. Lorenzo tested the name. It sounded plain, safe. Everything Isabella wasn't. His phone buzzed. A text from Blake. An address. 4201 West 18th Street, apartment 4B. Lease under Sarah Miller. Cash payments only. "Let's go," Lorenzo said, tossing the rabbit to Rocco. "And Rocco, if you draw your weapon in front of the child, I will kill you myself." The apartment building was a crumbling brick tenement that smelled of boiled cabbage and stale cigarettes. It was a far cry from the penthouse Isabella had shared with him during those 3 blissful secret months in 2018. Lorenzo kicked the door of 4B open. He didn't bother picking the lock. The apartment was small but clean. Toys were scattered on the rug. Half-eaten pieces of toast sat on the counter. She was there. She wasn't running. She was standing in the middle of the living room, a Glock 19, pointed steadily at the door. Her hand wasn't shaking. Mia was nowhere to be seen, likely hidden in the closet or the bathtub. "Put the gun down, Isabella," Lorenzo said, his voice surprisingly calm. He stepped inside, closing the broken door behind him. He signaled Rocco to stay in the hall. "My name is Sarah," she hissed. Her eyes were red-rimmed but fierce. "Get out." "You died," Lorenzo said, taking a slow step forward. "I mourned you. I almost started a war with the Russians because I thought they cut your brakes." "I know," she said. "I watched the news." "Why?" The word was a jagged shard in his throat. Isabella let out a bitter laugh. "Because if I stayed, you would have had to kill me, or they would have used me to kill you. You know the rules, Lorenzo. Omerta. No witnesses." "I would have burned the rules for you," Lorenzo shouted, his composure cracking. "I am the Don. Now I make the rules. You weren't the Don then," she screamed back. "You were just the executioner, and I was the witness to your father's murder." The air in the room grew heavy. This was the secret that had torn them apart. Isabella hadn't just been a lover. She had been the maid in the hotel room where Lorenzo's father was assassinated. She saw the face of the killer. The killer was Lorenzo's own uncle, the man who currently ran the commission. If Lorenzo had known she knew by Mafia law, he would have been forced to silence her to protect the family honor, or his uncle would have killed them both. "I saved you," she whispered, tears finally spilling over. "I ran to save you from having to choose between your blood and your heart." Lorenzo looked at her. Really looked at her. She was thinner, tired. The glamour was gone, replaced by the hard lines of survival. But she was still the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "And the girl?" Lorenzo asked softly. Isabella's grip on the gun tightened. "She's mine." "Is she?" Lorenzo took another step. He was close enough to touch the gun barrel now. He placed his chest directly against it. "Look me in the eye, Bella. Tell me she isn't mine." Isabella's lip quivered. She couldn't do it. She lowered the gun. "Her name is Mia," Isabella whispered, defeating washing over her. "She turns 7 next month." Lorenzo let out a breath he felt he had been holding for 6 years. He reached out his hand, trembling, and touched Isabella's cheek. She leaned into his touch, a reflex she couldn't stop. "You have the tattoo," he murmured. She pulled the collar of her shirt aside. There on her collarbone was the matching black bird. "I couldn't remove it," she said. "It was the only piece of you I had left." The moment was tender, heartbreakingly fragile. Crash! The window in the kitchen shattered inward. A canister clattered across the linoleum floor, hissing. "Gas!" Lorenzo yelled. He grabbed Isabella, spinning her around and shielding her body with his own as the room filled with thick white smoke. "Mia!" Isabella shrieked, struggling against his grip. "She's in the bedroom!" Lorenzo didn't hesitate. He held his breath, squinting through the stinging chemical fog. He kicked the bedroom door open. The room was empty. The window was open. The fire escape rattled outside. "No!" Isabella gasped, coughing violently. Lorenzo rushed to the window. Through the smoke and the rain, he saw a figure in black tactical gear descending the fire escape, a small, struggling bundle thrown over his shoulder. Mia! Lorenzo drew his gun and fired 2 shots, but the angle was bad. The figure jumped the last 10 feet into a waiting van, a white utility van with a logo on the side. Vance H5AC. Isabella screamed a sound of pure primal agony. Lorenzo grabbed her as she tried to climb out the window. "We can't catch them on foot, Rocco." He dragged her out of the apartment, down the hall, where Rocco was already recovering from a stun grenade that had been tossed in the corridor. "They took her," Lorenzo snarled, his eyes turning into pits of absolute darkness. "They took my daughter." He looked at Isabella. "Who knows you're here? Who found you?" Isabella was hyperventilating. "Nobody. I was careful. She froze. "The clinic. I had to update my emergency contact forms last week. The administrator. He was new. He had a tattoo on his neck." "What kind of tattoo?" Lorenzo demanded, shaking her shoulders. "A scorpion," she whispered. "A red scorpion." Lorenzo's blood ran cold. The Red Scorpion wasn't a random gang. It was the personal guard of Victor Russo. Victor Russo. The man Lorenzo had crippled 3 years ago. The man who had sworn to take everything Lorenzo loved. Lorenzo pulled Isabella toward the stairs. "Victor has her." "He'll kill her," Isabella sobbed, her legs giving out. Lorenzo caught her, lifting her into his arms. He looked down at her, and for the first time in years, the ghost was gone. In his place was a father. "No," Lorenzo said, his voice a low, terrifying promise. "He won't kill her. He's using her as bait to get to me." He kicked the stairwell door open. "And I'm going to make sure he regrets the day he was born. You're not running anymore, Bella. You're coming with me. We're going to get our daughter back." "And then?" she asked, clinging to his coat. "And then," Lorenzo said, checking the chamber of his gun, "I'm going to burn this city to the ground until there's no one left to threaten us." The ride to the safe house was silent, a suffocating vacuum of unsaid words. Lorenzo didn't take them to a basement or a hidden bunker. He drove straight to the gleaming spire of the Santoro Tower in downtown Chicago. The penthouse wasn't just a home. It was a fortress in the sky, protected by bulletproof glass and a private army. As the elevator doors slid open, revealing the panoramic view of the city night, Isabella shivered. She was wrapped in Lorenzo's suit jacket, stained with the grime of the alley, standing in a place that reeked of the power she had tried to escape. "Rocco!" Lorenzo barked, tossing his keys onto a marble console. "Lock down the perimeter. I want a 10-block radius monitored. If a pigeon flies too close to this building, I want to know its flight path." On it, boss, Rocco said, disappearing into the security room. Lorenzo turned to Isabella. He looked exhausted, the adrenaline fading to leave a cold, hard rage. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He downed one and slid the other across the granite island toward her. Drink, he commanded softly. You're in shock. Isabella ignored the glass. I don't want a drink, Lorenzo. I want my daughter. And you will get her. We'll get her, Lorenzo said, walking around the island to stand before her. But first you need to tell me everything. Victor Russo knew where you were. How? I told you the hospital. Victor Russo doesn't read hospital clerical forms. Lorenzo smashed his hand onto the counter, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Someone sold you out. Who knew you were alive? Who helped you disappear 6 years ago? Isabella flinched. She looked at the floor. Your uncle. The silence that followed was heavier than the one in the car. Lorenzo froze. Salvatore. Lorenzo asked, his voice dangerously quiet. My uncle Salvatore helped you hide from me. He gave me the money. Isabella confessed, tears streaming down her face. He told me that if I stayed, the commission would kill you for harboring a witness. He said the only way to save you was for me to die. So he arranged the car crash. He gave me the new identity. Lorenzo laughed. It was a dark, humorless sound. He turned away, running a hand through his hair. God, I was blind. He didn't do it to save me, Bella. He did it to control me. He got rid of my weakness so I would focus on the business. And now, he spun back around. Now he's using Russo to clean up the loose ends. Russo isn't just an enemy. He's Salvatore's attack dog. Lorenzo paced the room, his mind working like a chessboard. If Salvatore is behind this, then Mia isn't just a hostage. She's leverage. He wants me to step down, or he wants me dead. He stopped and looked at Isabella. Does Mia know? Know what? Does she know who I am? Isabella let out a shaky breath. She knows her father is a prince who had to go away to fight dragons. That's why she likes the tattoo. I told her the bird is the symbol of the prince's house. Lorenzo's expression softened, the heartbreak evident in his steel-grey eyes. A prince, he scoffed. I'm a butcher, Isabella. She doesn't see the... Isabella stepped closer, grabbing his arm. She saw you in the cafe today. She wasn't scared. She felt it. The connection. You have to bring her back, Lorenzo. Please. Lorenzo covered her hand with his. The electricity between them was still there, dormant but potent. I promise you. Tonight I am not a butcher. Tonight I am a father. The elevator dinged. Blake walked in holding a tablet. He was a small man with glasses looking more like an accountant than a criminal mastermind. I found the van, Blake said without preamble. Where? Lorenzo and Isabella asked in unison. The old meatpacking district, a warehouse owned by a shell company linked to Victor Russo. But there's a catch. Blake tapped the screen. Thermal imaging shows at least 30 heat signatures inside, heavily armed. And... he hesitated. And what? Lorenzo snapped. And there is a signal jammer. We can't get a layout of the inside. It's a kill box, Lorenzo. If you go in there, you're walking into a trap. Lorenzo checked his watch. 9:45 p.m. It's not a trap if you bring a bigger hammer, Lorenzo said. He walked to the wall, pressing a hidden panel. The wall slid open, revealing a rack of tactical gear and assault rifles. Isabella stared. What are you doing? I'm going to war, Lorenzo said, stripping off his dress shirt. He pulled on a Kevlar vest. "Blake, call the crew. I want the Alpha team and the Bravo team. We hit them from the roof and the ground simultaneously." "I'm coming with you," Isabella said. Lorenzo paused. "Absolutely not. You stay here, where it's safe." "She is my daughter," Isabella shouted. "And I know that warehouse. I worked a shift there as a cleaner 2 years ago, when I was desperate for cash. I know the service tunnels." Lorenzo looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had made him fall in love with her. She wasn't a damsel. She was a survivor. "Rocco," Lorenzo said, tossing a smaller Kevlar vest toward her. "Get her a sidearm." The rain had turned into a storm. Thunder rattled the windows of the black armored vans, speeding toward the meatpacking district. Lorenzo sat in the back of the lead van, checking the magazine of his customized AR-15. Isabella sat across from him, her hair tied back, looking pale but determined. "The service tunnel entrance is behind the loading dock," Isabella explained over the sound of the rain. "It leads to the basement. That's where the old freezers are. If they are holding her, it will be there. The walls are thick, soundproof." "We go in quiet," Lorenzo commanded his team through the headset. "Silencers on. If we make too much noise, they might panic and hurt the girl. We secure the package first, then we kill everyone else." The van screeched to a halt 2 blocks away. They moved like shadows through the wet streets. Lorenzo took point, moving with a lethal grace. Isabella stayed close behind him, flanked by Rocco. They reached the rear of the massive brick building. As Isabella had said, a rusted metal grate covered a drainage tunnel. Rocco used bolt cutters to snap the lock. They descended into the darkness. The smell was awful stagnant water and old rust. "Left here," Isabella whispered, guiding them through the maze of pipes. They reached a heavy steel door. Lorenzo held up a fist. The team froze. He placed a fiber-optic camera under the door. "2 guards," Lorenzo whispered, "playing cards, facing away." He nodded to Rocco. Rocco opened the door, and 2 suppressed shots, foot, foot, echoed softly. The guards slumped over the table. Lorenzo moved in, sweeping the room. It was a break room. Beyond it lay the corridor to the freezers. "Check the heat signatures," Lorenzo ordered Blake, who was monitoring from the van. "Directly ahead, large room. 1 small heat signature in the center, surrounded by 5 large ones. That's her." Lorenzo's heart slammed against his ribs. They moved down the corridor. The temperature dropped. Frost clung to the pipes. They reached the main freezer doors. They were slightly ajar. "Wait," Lorenzo signaled. "It's too easy." Suddenly, the lights in the corridor blazed on blindingly bright. "Welcome, nephew," a voice boomed over an intercom. Lorenzo cursed, shoving Isabella behind a concrete pillar just as automatic gunfire erupted from the catwalks above them. "Ambush!" Rocco yelled, returning fire. Bullets chipped away the concrete. Lorenzo fired blindly upward, suppressing the shooters. They were pinned down. "He knew we were coming!" Isabella screamed over the noise. "Salvatore!" Lorenzo growled. "He fed us the location." "Lorenzo?" The voice on the intercom laughed. It was Victor Russo. Come out, or I turn the temperature in the freezer down to absolute 0. The little bird is already shivering." Lorenzo looked at Isabella. Her eyes were wide with terror. "Cover me," Lorenzo said to Rocco. "Boss, you can't. Cover me." Lorenzo broke cover. He didn't run away. He ran forward, sliding across the wet floor, firing his rifle with precision. 2 men on the catwalk fell crashing to the ground. He reached the heavy freezer lever and yanked the door open. The sight inside froze his blood. Mia was there. She was tied to a metal chair in the center of the vast, empty room. But she wasn't alone. Sitting on a crate next to her, casually holding a remote detonator, was a man in a pristine white suit. He was older, with silver hair and a grandfatherly smile. It wasn't Victor Russo. "Hello, Lorenzo," Uncle Salvatore said, smiling. "You're late." Lorenzo kept his gun raised, aimed at his uncle's head. "Let her go, Sal." "Put the gun down, Lorenzo," Salvatore said calmly. "Or I press this button, and the C4 strapped to the chair turns your legacy into pink mist." Lorenzo looked at Mia. She was gagged, her eyes wide and terrified. She looked at Lorenzo, and then at the tattoo on his wrist. Recognition flashed in her eyes. The prince. Lorenzo slowly lowered his rifle. He placed it on the floor and kicked it away. "Smart boy." Salvatore chuckled. "Isabella, come in here, my dear. I know you're lurking in the hallway." Isabella stepped into the doorway, her gun held loosely at her side. When she saw Salvatore, she looked like she might vomit. "You promised you would leave us alone if I left." "I lied." Salvatore shrugged. "Business changes. I need Lorenzo out of the way. He's become too independent, too soft, and now I see why." He gestured to Mia. "So here is the deal." Salvatore stood up. "Lorenzo, you sign over the rights to the shipping lines and the territory to me. You agree to go into exile, and I let the girl live. Isabella can go with you or not. I don't care." "And if I refuse," Lorenzo asked, his muscles coiled tight, "then I kill the girl. Then I kill Isabella. Then I kill you. And I tell the family you died a hero fighting the Russians." Lorenzo looked at Mia. He looked at Isabella. "I'll sign," Lorenzo said. "No," Isabella cried. "He'll kill us anyway." "I'll sign," Lorenzo repeated, stepping closer. "Just let her go." Salvatore smiled, pulling a folded document from his jacket. "I knew you were reasonable." He stepped forward to hand Lorenzo the paper. In that split second, chaos erupted. Mia, who had been working her small hands against the tape for hours, suddenly kicked out. Her small sneaker connected solidly with Salvatore's shin. It wasn't a hard hit, but it was surprising. Salvatore flinched, looking down. "Now!" Lorenzo roared. He didn't dive for a gun. He dove for Mia. He tackled the chair, shielding her body with his own, knocking them both to the cold concrete floor. Simultaneously, a single shot rang out. It wasn't Rocco. It wasn't Lorenzo. Isabella stood at the doorway, her arms steady, smoke rising from the barrel of her pistol. Salvatore stumbled back, clutching his throat. He tried to speak, but only blood gurgled out. He looked at Isabella in shock. The nurse, the victim, the weakness. He collapsed backward, his thumb slipping off the detonator without pressing it. The room fell silent. Lorenzo ripped the tape off Mia's mouth. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling. Lorenzo froze. The word hit him harder than a bullet. He pulled her into his chest, burying his face in her curls. He was shaking. "I've got you," he choked out. "I've got you, Mia. I'm here." Isabella ran to them, dropping to her knees, wrapping her arms around both of them. For a moment, on the floor of a freezing meat locker, the Santoro family was whole. But the war wasn't over. Rocco ran in. "Boss Russo's men are retreating, but we have a problem. The police are 2 minutes out. We have to go. Now." Lorenzo stood up, lifting Mia effortlessly into his arms. He looked at his uncle's body. "Burn it," Lorenzo said coldly to Rocco. "Burn it all down." He looked at Isabella. "We're leaving Chicago. Tonight." The convoy of black SUVs tore down the interstate, leaving the glowing skyline of Chicago behind, like a fading ember. The rain had stopped, replaced by a suffocating fog that clung to the asphalt. Inside the lit vehicle, the silence was absolute. Lorenzo sat in the back, his eyes fixed on the sleeping form of Mia. She was curled up across the seat, her head resting on Isabella's lap, the dirty stuffed rabbit clutched tight to her chest. Isabella stared out the window, her hand mechanically stroking Mia's hair. She hadn't said a word since they left the warehouse, since she pulled the trigger. "You saved us," Lorenzo said, his voice rough, breaking the quiet. Isabella didn't look at him. "I killed a man. Your uncle. He wasn't family," Lorenzo said, reaching across the seat. He hesitated, then placed his hand gently on her knee. "He was a disease. You cut it out." Isabella turned to him then. Her eyes were hollow. "And what happens now, Lorenzo?" "The commission won't overlook this. You said it yourself. Salvatore was the leadership. You just started a civil war." "No," Lorenzo said, his jaw tightening. "I finished one." He pulled out his phone. It had been vibrating incessantly for 20 minutes. He finally answered. "Talk to me, Blake." "It's a mess." "Boss?" Blake's voice was frantic. "News of Salvatore's death is already hitting the wire. But here is the problem. Victor Russo is spinning the narrative. He's telling the other families that you murdered your uncle in cold blood to seize total control. He's calling for a cull. A cull. The order to hunt down and exterminate a rogue faction." "Where is Russo?" Lorenzo asked, his eyes cold. "He's mobilizing. We've tracked a convoy heading north. He knows about the Lake Geneva estate, Lorenzo. It's the only property Salvatore didn't know about, which means it's the only place Russo suspects you'll go." "How far out is he?" "An hour, maybe less." Lorenzo hung up. He looked at Isabella, who was watching him with terrified understanding. "He's coming, isn't he?" she whispered. "We aren't running anymore. Bella," Lorenzo said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal register. "If we keep running, Mia will spend her life looking over her shoulder. We end this tonight." The safe house on Lake Geneva was a fortress disguised as a vacation home. Surrounded by dense pine forests and facing the black water of the lake, it was isolated, defensible, and stocked with enough weaponry to arm a small country. Rocco and the Alpha team immediately set up a perimeter. They killed the exterior lights, plunging the estate into darkness. Inside, Lorenzo carried a sleeping Mia into the master bedroom. He laid her down on the massive bed, pulling the duvet up to her chin. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Daddy?" She mumbled the word, still sounding foreign and miraculous on her tongue. "I'm here, Piccola," Lorenzo whispered, brushing a curl off her forehead. Mia reached out her small hand, grabbing his wrist. She turned his arm over, tracing the black ink of the skeletal bird with her thumb. "Mummy said the bird is sad because he lost his flower," Mia whispered sleepily. "But he found it right." Lorenzo felt a lump form in his throat, hard and painful. He looked at the tattoo, the symbol of his grief. And then he looked at the little girl who was the living embodiment of the rose he thought he had lost. "Yeah," Lorenzo choked out. "Yeah, he found it. Go back to sleep, Mia. I'll be right outside." He kissed her forehead and stepped out of the room, closing the door softly. Isabella was waiting in the hallway. She had washed the grime off her face, but the weariness remained. She called you Daddy, Isabella said softly. She deserves a better one, Lorenzo muttered, checking the magazine of his sidearm. She doesn't want a better one. She wants you. Isabella stepped closer, blocking his path. Lorenzo, look at me. He looked up. 6 years ago, I left because I thought your world would destroy us, she said, her voice trembling. Tonight you walked into fire for her. You're not the same man I left. I'm worse, Lorenzo said. I'm a killer Bella. So am I now, she countered, reaching out to touch the collar of his shirt. We are broken people, Lorenzo. But maybe we fit together. Lorenzo dropped his guard. He grabbed her waist, pulling her flush against him. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was desperate, fueled by 6 years of hunger and the adrenaline of survival. It was a promise and a plea. When this is over, Lorenzo murmured against her lips, I'm never letting you go again. Boss? Rocco's voice crackled over the radio, interrupting them. They're here. Headlights at the main gate. 3 armored trucks. Heavy hitters. Lorenzo pulled back the mask of the ghost, sliding back into place. Stay with Mia, he ordered Isabella. Do not open that door unless it's me. Lorenzo. She grabbed his arm. Come back. Always. The Battle of Lake Geneva was not a skirmish. It was a massacre. Victor Russo didn't come to negotiate. He came to burn. His mercenaries breached the front gate with a ram storming the lawn under the cover of smoke grenades. Lorenzo stood on the second-floor balcony, a sniper rifle in his hands. He was calm. The wind rustled the trees, and the world slowed down. Breath in, breath out. He squeezed the trigger. The driver of the lead truck slumped over the wheel. The vehicle swerved, crashing into a stone fountain. Engage, Lorenzo commanded into his comms. The estate erupted in gunfire. Rocco and his team unleashed a crossfire from the tree line, cutting down Russo's first wave. But Russo had brought numbers. They swarmed the porch, suppressing the defenders with heavy machine gun fire. Lorenzo abandoned the rifle and drew his dual pistols. He moved through the house like a phantom, taking down intruders who managed to breach the windows. He reached the grand staircase just as the front doors were blown off their hinges. Victor Russo stepped through the smoke. He was a massive man, wearing a trench coat, holding a sawed-off shotgun. He was flanked by 4 heavily armed guards. Santoro, Russo roared. Come out and die like a man. Lorenzo was crouched on the landing, hidden by the shadows. He checked his ammo. 2 rounds left in the left gun, 3 in the right. He didn't have enough. He saw Russo move toward the stairs, toward the hallway, where Mia and Isabella were hiding. A cold, primal rage flooded Lorenzo's veins. He holstered one gun and pulled a combat knife from his boot. Rocco flashbang, Lorenzo yelled. A canister rolled from the upper landing, clinking down the stairs. Bang! A blinding white light filled the foyer. Lorenzo vaulted over the railing, dropping 10 feet onto the soldier nearest to Russo. He drove the knife into the man's neck before he even hit the ground. He rolled, coming up with his pistol raised. Bang! 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 3 headshots. The remaining guards dropped. Russo, blinded and deafened, swung his shotgun wildly. The blast shredded the drywall inches from Lorenzo's head. Lorenzo lunged forward, tackling Russo. They crashed into a glass display case, shards raining down on them. Russo was stronger, but Lorenzo was fighting for something more than power. He was fighting for the little girl upstairs. Russo managed to land a heavy blow to Lorenzo's ribs, knocking the wind out of him. He pinned Lorenzo to the ground, his hands closing around Lorenzo's throat. You took my territory. Russo spat, his face purple with rage. "You took my pride." Lorenzo's vision began to spot. He clawed at Russo's hands, but the grip was like iron. "And you," Lorenzo wheezed, his eyes locking onto Russo's, "took my daughter." Lorenzo's hand found a shard of broken glass on the floor, a long, jagged piece of the display case. With a guttural roar, Lorenzo drove the glass upward, jamming it deep into the soft tissue under Russo's jaw. Russo's eyes went pun, his grip loosened. He gagged, blood pouring from his mouth, and collapsed sideways off of Lorenzo. Lorenzo lay there for a moment, gasping for air, his ribs burning. Silence fell over the house. "Boss!" Rocco's voice called out from the doorway. "Perimeter is secure. The rest of them are retreating." Lorenzo pushed himself up, wiping the blood from his face. He looked at Russo's body. It was over. The war was done. He didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. He stood up, limping slightly, and walked up the stairs. He opened the bedroom door. Isabella was sitting on the bed, her arms wrapped around Mia, covering the girl's ears. She looked up, her eyes wide with fear. Lorenzo stood in the doorway, bloodied, bruised, his shirt torn. He looked like a monster. But then he smiled. It was a tired, genuine smile. "It's over," he whispered. Mia wiggled free from Isabella's grip. She looked at Lorenzo. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She slid off the bed and padded across the room in her socks. She stopped in front of him. She reached out and took his hand, the hand that had just killed a man. She turned it over, finding the tattoo on his wrist, which was now smeared with blood. She used her pajama sleeve to wipe the blood away from the ink bird. "You have to keep it clean, Daddy," she scolded gently, "or the bird won't fly." Lorenzo fell to his knees. He wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her small shoulder, and for the first time in his life, the ghost of Chicago wept. 1 year later, the sunlight over the Amalfi Coast did not behave like the light in Chicago. In Chicago, the sun was a cold, distant spotlight that glared off steel and glass, offering no warmth, only exposure. Here, suspended above the Tyrrhenian Sea, the sun was a physical weight, a heavy golden blanket that smelled of salt-heated rosemary and ancient stone. Lorenzo Santoro stood on the terracotta terrace of a villa that clung to the cliffside like a swallow's nest. His hands, once feared by the most dangerous men in the Western Hemisphere, were currently buried to the wrists in flour and water. He was making pizza dough. It was a maddening, imprecise process. The humidity of the sea air messed with the yeast. The flour was coarser than what he was used to. The old Lorenzo, the architect, the man who calculated leverage and risk to the 4th decimal point, would have hated the variables. He would have demanded a controlled environment. But the man standing here now found a strange, rhythmic meditation in the mess. He pushed the heels of his hands into the dough, folding and turning. Push, fold, turn. It was an act of creation. For 15 years, his hands had been instruments of dismantling organizations, dismantling lives, dismantling hope. Now they were building something that would sustain, not destroy. He paused to wipe sweat from his forehead with his forearm. As he did, the linen sleeve of his shirt rode up, exposing the inside of his left wrist. The tattoo was still there. The black skeletal bird, stark against his skin. But the angry knotted scar tissue that had surrounded it for years had softened, faded by 12 months of Mediterranean sun and salt water. It no longer looked like a fresh wound. It looked like a memory. "You're overworking it," a voice drifted from the archway of the kitchen. "It's going to be tough as a brick, amore." Lorenzo turned a half smile, tugging at the corner of his mouth. Isabella was leaning against the stone doorframe, a woven basket resting on her hip. It was overflowing with lemons the size of grapefruits, their yellow rinds bright against her white sundress. Lorenzo stopped breathing for a second. It was a habit he couldn't break. Every time he saw her, really saw her, he had to remind himself that she wasn't a hallucination. She looked different. The sharp, hunted angles of her face had smoothed out. The shadows that used to live under her hazel eyes, born from 6 years of looking over her shoulder, had vanished. She was tan, her hair was lighter, and she moved with a lazy, confident grace that belonged to a woman who knew she was safe. "I am the dawn of this kitchen," Lorenzo retorted, though his voice lacked any real bite. He turned back to the marble counter, throwing a dusting of flour over the dough. "In this territory, sir, high word is law. If I say the dough needs kneading, it gets kneaded." Isabella laughed. It was a rich, throaty sound that mixed perfectly with the crash of the waves far below. She walked over to him, placing the basket on the table. She reached out, plucking a smudge of flour from his cheek. "You're a tyrant." She teased her fingers, lingering on his jawline. "A flour-covered tyrant. But I suppose the view makes up for the terrible service." Lorenzo abandoned the dough. He wiped his hands on a towel and pulled her in by the waist. She smelled of citrus zest, expensive sunscreen, and peace. "The view is the only reason I bought the place," he murmured, looking down at her. He kissed her, and for a moment the world narrowed down to the pulse in her neck and the warmth of her skin. It was a slow kiss, unhurried by the threat of impending doom. It was the kind of kiss they had never been able to afford in Chicago, where every moment of intimacy was stolen time. When they broke apart, Lorenzo rested his forehead against hers. "Any news from Blake?" "Just a text," she whispered. "The transfer is complete. The accounts in the Caymans are settled. The coroner's report on Lorenzo Santoro remains unchallenged." Lorenzo nodded, a heavy exhale leaving his chest. It had cost nearly 80% of his liquidity, hundreds of millions of dollars, to buy their death. The explosion at the Lake Geneva estate had been the perfect cover. As far as the Commission, the FBI, and the remnants of the Russo clan were concerned, Lorenzo Santoro had died in the fire that consumed his enemy. The Santoro Empire was ash. The territory had been carved up by street gangs and rival families. The architect was a cautionary tale told to young associates. And Lorenzo didn't care. He wouldn't trade this terrace, this flower, this woman, for all the concrete in Illinois. "Daddy, Daddy, look!" The shout broke the trance. The glass doors slid open with a bang, and a small hurricane in a yellow dress burst onto the terrace. Mia was 7 now. She had shot up 3 inches in the last year. Her legs long and knobby, her front tooth missing, giving her a lisp that Lorenzo found heartbreakingly adorable. She was holding a piece of construction paper with both hands, waving it like a flag of surrender. "Whoa, slow down, Piccola." Lorenzo crouched down, ignoring the ache in his knees from the old injuries. "What is the emergency?" "I fixed it," Mia announced, skidding to a halt. She thrust the paper into his face. "I fixed the picture." Lorenzo gently took the paper. It was a crayon drawing rendered with the intense, colorful pressure that only a child could muster. He recognized the subject immediately. It was his arm. She had drawn the arm in peach crayon, and on the wrist she had drawn the black bird. She had even added the little details of the skeletal wings. But it was what she had added that made his throat close up. In the bird's beak, where the bleeding, wilting rose had been in the original design, Mia had drawn a massive exploding flower. It was a riot of color petals of neon orange, bright blue, and sunny yellow. It looked like a sunflower crossed with a firework. It was huge, dwarfing the bird, filling the page with light. Underneath, in wobbly, mismatched block letters, she had written, "The bird is home." Lorenzo stared at the paper. The lines blurred as his vision swam. "Do you like it?" Mia asked, her voice dropping to an anxious whisper when he didn't answer immediately. "Mommy told me the story. She said the bird on your arm was sad because he lost his flower a long time ago. She said he was flying and flying to find it." Mia pointed a small, sticky finger at the neon flower. "But he found us, so he isn't sad anymore. He needs a happy flower, Daddy. Because he's home." Lorenzo looked up at Isabella. She was standing by the railing, tears silent and glistening on her cheeks, a soft smile playing on her lips. She nodded once. Lorenzo looked back at the little girl, who had the same eyes as the woman he loved. The little girl he had almost lost to a warehouse freezer. The little girl who had walked through fire and come out holding crayons. "It's perfect, Mia." Lorenzo choked out his voice, thick and rough. "It's the best masterpiece I have ever owned. Better than any painting in the museums." Mia beamed, the gap in her teeth on full display. "Really? Really?" Lorenzo scooped her up, lifting her high into the air. She squealed, her laughter ringing out over the cliffs, louder than the gulls, louder than the waves. He spun her around, burying his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood innocence. That evening, the sun finally dipped below the horizon, turning the sea into a vast expanse of bruised purple and indigo. The air cooled, and the crickets began their nightly symphony in the olive groves. Mia had fallen asleep on the sofa inside, exhausted by a day of swimming and art. Lorenzo and Isabella sat on the low stone wall of the terrace, a bottle of cheap local red wine between them. It tasted of earth and grapes and honesty far better than the $1,000 vintages he used to drink in the penthouses of the Loop. Lorenzo swirled the wine in his glass, watching the red liquid coat the sides. "Do you miss it?" Isabella asked quietly. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the stars emerging over the water. "Miss what?" "The power." She said the word hanging heavy in the air. "The respect, walking into a room and watching the air change, being the ghost." Lorenzo set the glass down. He looked at his hands, hands that had strangled, shot, and broken. He thought about the silence of the last year. "I was a ghost in that life, Bella," he said, his voice low and contemplative. "That's what people didn't understand. They thought ghost was a nickname for how I killed. But it was what I was. I walked through walls. I haunted the city. I was cold. I didn't feel the heat or the wind or the fear. I wasn't real." He reached out, taking her hand in his. Her skin was warm. Her pulse was steady. "Here, with you kneading dough that refuses to rise, watching Mia learn to swim." He squeezed her hand. "Here I'm just a man. I bleed. I burn, I worry, and that is so much harder than being a ghost. But it is infinitely better." Isabella turned to him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. "The ghost is dead," she whispered, a declaration of finality. "Long live the family," Lorenzo replied. He looked down at his wrist one last time in the dim light. The skeletal bird was no longer carrying a burden of grief. In his mind's eye, he could only see the neon crayon flower. Lorenzo Santoro closed his eyes and listened to the rhythm of the ocean. For the first time in 35 years, he didn't check the exits. He didn't calculate the angles. He didn't reach for a weapon. He simply sat in the dark, and for the first time, he wasn't afraid of it. He was home. And that is how the ghost of Chicago finally found his heart, not in the barrel of a gun or the bottom of a whiskey bottle, but in the colorful, messy drawing of a 6-year-old girl. Lorenzo and Isabella proved that no matter how dark the past is, love has the power to write a new future. They traded an empire of fear for a life of peace, proving that the strongest thing a man can ever do isn't to kill. It is to protect the ones who make him human. I really hope you guys enjoyed this roller coaster of emotion, danger, and redemption. It was a long journey, but I think they earned that sunset in Italy. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a huge thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow and tells me you want more stories like this one. And I have a question for you guys. If you were Isabella, could you have truly forgiven Lorenzo for his past, knowing what he had done? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Until next time, keep believing in happy endings.